Nancy, and welcome back to my channel. Today I am gonna do a big what I've read in the last couple of months video. And so originally I was thinking that I would just like do my July reads video and post that even though it's the beginning of September because I read so much in August that I was like thinking it would be hard to do in one video, but I kind of been going back and forth, and I feel like because it's September and I want to start getting into fall vibes, I'm just going to combine them. So I did actually film July reads a few days ago. So I'm going to put that in here, and then I will talk about August reads to it. The first book I read in July was Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. This is a story of Elizabeth Zott, and she's a chemist in the 1960s who is faced with like these insurmountable obstacles as a woman who is in this field. She's sexually assaulted, harassed, like not taken seriously, fired, like just like everything you can imagine happens to her, but she still perseveres and is extremely passionate about chemistry. And while she's working at this one group, she meets Calvin. They have like just like this insane chemistry, and Calvin's also a chemist, and they like first kind of butt heads, but yeah, they like very quickly feel this like chemistry and they fall in love. Elizabeth Zott though like really refuses to get married, which is especially surprising in the 1960s, but she like doesn't want to be known as like somebody's wife. She wants her own career and to like make her own way, despite the fact that she like loves Calvin with all of her heart and they have this like beautiful relationship. So a tragedy ensues, and I don't want to say too much without like spoiling anything, but she also is kind of shunned by the scientific community and ends up like a few years later taking this job as a TV host on this new show called Supper at 6, where she teaches people to cook because she really likes to cook and is really good at it. And she teaches women across the country to cook, but it's like in her way, like in her kind of chemist way of doing it, which she really butts heads with the producers and stuff. So that's kind of a fun storyline as well. She's basically like empowering these women across the country, and I just like loved it so much. It was so good. I was like just so riveted and emotional throughout the whole thing, and it's like about her story as a woman being a chemist and like making her way in the world, and her relationships with people and her career. I think it's so good. Highly recommend. I know it was like a huge deal last year, and like rightfully so. This book came out like spring of last year, I think. And yeah, I just got around to reading it and just loved it so much. So yeah, Lessons in Chemistry. Oh, one more thing I will say about it is that like I don't usually read a whole lot of historical fiction, and really liked it, but it also kind of reminded me of Taylor Jenkins Reid's style in that like it almost feels real, like it is actually like recounting someone's life, which I feel like adds to that. Like there's just like the emotion put behind it. Everything feels so real and relatable and interesting. So second is The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. And this was, I think it was supposed to be my book club's like May or June read, but with summer we kind of took a little bit of a break. We're starting up again in September, which I'm really excited for, but I went ahead and read this anyway. And this is about Araya, and she is the adopted human daughter of this like night-born vampire king. So she leads this like really interesting life where she is surrounded by vampires, but she herself is human and has to deal with both the dangers of the vampires and being human, but she's also wasn't really like didn't grow up in the human world. And so it's like this interesting story of her like trying to find her place, and she is doing that by entering this Kajari. It's this like tournament. This is like gave me a little bit like Hunger Games, Throne of Glass kind of vibes in the beginning, because there's this tournament and they're basically, it's mostly vampires, but somehow she's also let in, and they're like competing kind of to be the last one standing in this tournament. And they like win this like powerful gift from the goddess of death. So she's competing in this tournament, and of course the tournament's like really dangerous, but she did grow up the Nightborn King's like daughter, and you know, has learned a lot from that and trained for this specific event for like her whole life. So she is like really strong and powerful, but she's competing against vampires. And she meets Rain, and yeah, her father definitely does not approve of her making alliances with people or like trusting anyone in the tournament, because it could very easily turn around and kill each other. So that is like kind of the basic premise of this book, and I like kind of felt mixed about this one, to be honest. I think this was like a little bit hyped up for me, and I had seen everywhere that this was like just like ACOTAR and like so incredible, and I didn't like necessarily dislike it, but I definitely was not blown away, if that makes sense. So if you like the premise and like the fantasy romance thing, I just personally felt like it was a little bit slow, and I had a harder time than I expected getting through it. Again, not bad. I actually preferred the author's other series, which was Daughter of No Worlds. I preferred this. I don't know why, just did. I have to read the rest of the series still, but yeah, I was honestly like mildly disappointed by it. I think it's just because I had high expectations. I did end up getting the second one, and I honestly debated picking it up or not. And like, I don't really DNF series or books at all, like almost ever, like officially. Usually I'll at least, you know, kind of have it on my TBR, but I've been really on the fence about this one, because I think it just like didn't hold my interest, especially at the end. Like, I found it to be a little bit predictable, and yeah, I don't know. I liked the characters though, and it was kind of a fun, it's probably also the first vampire story I've read in a really long time, so that was fun. Anyway, The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. The next three I did for my reading challenge for July, and man, this was like the month that I did not finish this challenge. I was trying to read 5 books and read 3. So I read The Disaster Tourist, and this has been on my TBR for a really long time. It is translated from Korean. This one surrounds this woman, Yona, who works for this company that does like disaster tourism. So they bring people to these like sites where disasters have occurred, and they like make money off of this. And it's like this whole industry that is like this book surrounds. And I thought it was like such an interesting concept to think about, like disaster and tourism, and like kind of how we like view that, and how this woman interacts with it, because she like works for this company, but then she ends up getting sent to like kind of as a vacation on one of the trips, and it like really takes some turns from there, because she's like used to be on the back end of it, but then goes as like a participant, but also ends up seeing kind of more than you usually would on a trip like this, that like you're not supposed to. And essentially like the site that she visits is like not necessarily what it seems or what they're like marketing it as. So super interesting premise. I enjoyed it. I think I was like, I didn't love it also quite as much as I thought I would, but I had a good time reading it, and I thought it was well written and interesting themes, and yeah, fun to think about. So The Disaster Tourist. We then had Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This is also something that's been on my TBR, this one since it came out in 2022. And I had picked up this, the UK version, when I was in London, and finally got around to reading it. So this one is about these 2 wives, Miri and Leah. And Leah is a scientist who travels on this mission into like the deep sea. And her like mission ends up being gone for way longer than was anticipated. And her wife, Miri, is like really like confused, tries to get to hold of the company. No one like tells her anything. No one is like saying anything. They keep just saying that like, oh, they'll be back, like it takes longer than normal, but like it like months go by and they don't come back. They finally do come back, and as time goes on, Leah seems different, like very different. There's something weird. We don't really know what happened under the ocean, and there's something going on that's very mysterious, and it's told from like alternating points of view. So it'll be told from Miri and then from Leah's point of view. So Miri like watching this happen to her wife and struggling with both like her being gone and then her coming back and this whole change and trying to figure out what's going on. And then it also tells Leah's story as she's down there on the mission and then as she gets back. So very kind of creepy and strange. I really enjoyed this also. I thought it was, yeah, I don't even know if I have any words to describe it. It's like very strange, but I enjoyed it. Yeah. And then we have In Watermelon Sugar by Richard Brodigan. And I don't really even know how to describe this. I feel like at this point, like what happened in this book was also completely jumbled in my mind. So I'm gonna read the back. Death is a place where the sun shines a different color every day and where people travel to the length of their dreams. Rejecting the violence and hate of the old gang at the forgotten works, they lead gentle lives in watermelon sugar. In this book, Richard Brodigan discovers and expresses the mood of the counterculture generation. So this is like dystopian, which is why I was interested in it. I really love dystopian, and I enjoyed the reading experience, and will probably come back to it because I feel like I don't understand a lot of what happened. It's like, it's easy to read, and then it's like short, and it's like these almost like little vignettes, but it was also a little bit confusing. But it's about this guy and his life and his relationship with like two different people over the course of time, and like these women and their relationship. One who is like kind of interested in this like forgotten works place and these old things, and then his like new relationship that is at death and is like more in this like present place. This is super vague, but yeah, so I thought it was good. Overall confusing. I will come back to it, but yeah. Okay, so next was Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, and this is about two writers, Athena Liu, who is a Chinese American writer, and June Hayward, and they're like friends, but kind of like, I don't know, debatably friends, I guess. There are times in the book where like it seems like they were really close, and other times where it didn't. And they're writers, and towards the very beginning of the book, Athena dies of like this really weird freak accident. And there's a little bit of history behind both of them, and that like Athena has been really successful in her career, and June has not really. Like Athena kind of like blew up and was like really popular, and June definitely kind of resents that. And June is narrating the whole thing, which is really funny. It's very satirical, but she resents it and definitely thinks it's like mostly just because she is not white. And her voice is so funny to read. I feel like she's incredibly delusional, but June is. And so that was pretty funny. But June is like there the night she dies, and her Athena Liu's like newest work is like on the table, like her new book. No one's read it. She's like really secretive, so no one has read it, but it's there. And so she ends up taking it, and at first is like saying that she's like telling herself she's just gonna like edit it and get it out, and then ends up like publishing it completely under her name. Well, actually she changes her name to Juniper Song, and she ends up publishing it herself and blows up. Like it's really popular, it's a bestseller, and this book is like all about like what happens after that. And yeah, I feel like I had pretty high expectations for this too. I've been really working on in August, like trying to like work on my expectations so that like my opinions of books are not so clouded by like what I went in expecting it to be. But I definitely was not as impressed by this as I expected to be because I feel like the premise is really interesting and funny. Yeah, I will say with Cindy did a video on this that I thought was really interesting and kind of like summarized it much better than I ever could. So I will link that down below. I felt like there were some interesting things about it. Yeah, overall it was like pretty funny and kind of hilarious, like again how like delusional the main character was, like denying her racism when it was like very blatant and obvious. And so that was definitely funny, but it was also really interesting because the way R.F. Kuang tells the story is like there aren't really any good characters, I would say. Like there's a lot of not great characters, and so like June steals Athena's work, but like we find out things about Athena that are also not great, and it's just kind of like interesting to like look at those dynamics and hear June's voice as she tries to like justify her actions. So yeah, definitely like was worth the read, I think, but didn't enjoy as much as I thought I would. So yeah, Yellowface. So that was like the bulk of what I read. And then at some point during the month of July, I went on a little bit of a deep dive into this series called the Rejected Mate series. I'll put like a picture. I don't have my iPad with me. My friend is borrowing it to read Fourth Wing, and there are 4 of these books. They were relatively like quick and easy to read. So the first one is called The Tyrant Alpha's Rejected Mate, and the whole series, it's called 5 Packs. That's what it's called. And the whole series takes place in this world where there's like these packs of werewolves that are like interspersed into the human world. But it's like the stories fully take place in the pack of werewolves. In this first one, Una is like very rejected by the pack. I mean, she's like part of it, but she's like kind of like low ranking and not looked very positively on, and she like goes into the like their main kitchen area where they all eat together and ends up finding out that she is the alpha, Kelly, his mate. The whole werewolf thing, like the mate thing, is very werewolf. It's in every single one of these books, and that's kind of like the main premise. And he's like very in denial when this happens. But the way this world works is that like the mate bond, I guess, like snaps into place when the female is like ready to change, I guess, because they like don't change into their werewolf form until later, like late teens maybe. And Una's actually older, and she still like hasn't changed. I feel like she's almost like late 20s. Yeah, so then it's like all about this relationship, and each book is like, I'm not gonna go into each book because like they're kind of very similar premise. I will say though that something that was like positive for me about this series was that I found that with like Ice Planet Barbarians, it got really repetitive. And while like the premise is kind of similar in each of them, because each story takes place in like a different pack, they felt different enough to me that like I didn't get bored as I kind of did with Ice Planet Barbarians. And then I also read, like earlier in the spring, I read like the Monster Ball series, which to me these all fall into like the very like the smutty monster romance. I don't know, alien, werewolves, monsters. And yeah, the Monster Ball series was written, each one's written by a different author, so like that kept it a little bit more like less repetitive. But I feel like there were like a lot more inconsistencies in like world and like how the stories were told, whereas like this is all told from the same voice, same author, but they felt different enough that it wasn't like that repetitive. Like I had a good time reading all 4 of them. Yeah, it's like not great literature necessarily, but it was a fun time. So yes, that is the Rejected Mate series. And with that is everything that I read in July. So, okay, so second part of the video. is my August reads. I mentioned at the beginning I read a ton in August, which was awesome. I find that August and September tend to be like my highest reading months. I don't really know why. Anyway, read a lot and I'm very excited to share a lot of different genres, so it's kind of exciting. Yeah, I'll just go into it. The Sentence by Louise Erdrich, and I've never read any Louise Erdrich, but she's very popular and has written a lot of other things that I would like to read. So The Sentence sounded like, the premise sounded really interesting to me. It's essentially about this bookstore in Minneapolis that's being haunted by a ghost, or that's how like the description reads in the front cover. This book is about, she mostly writes about Indigenous communities, so that is what this is about. A lot of the characters are Indigenous, and there's a lot of like folklore and stuff that's like put into it from the Indigenous community. So The Sentence is kind of about this bookstore and these characters surrounding this bookstore. The reason I say that is because like the one thing that I kind of took issue with, and like I get why people didn't love this, is that I feel like the description is not super accurate. There is like some haunting of this bookshop, but like it's about so much more, and so much like that doesn't really feel like the focus of it. There is kind of this mystery around the person who is haunting the store, and I really like that. I thought it was fun, but that's not like really the main part of this book. So if you're looking like just for like a mystery and like that part of it, I feel like you might be disappointed, because it's like about more than that, and that's not like, while there is a lot about it, that's not really the main focus. I feel like it's more about like human connection and like the lives of the people that the story surrounds. And it takes place at the beginning of COVID, so there's like a lot of COVID reference, which I didn't really expect. And it's been a few years, so like I was fine with it, but I know a lot of people are like, we lived through that, don't really want to read about it even now. So that beginning time, like that time of like extreme isolation. So there's that in here. There are some really sad parts. There's a lot of really great characters. Like now that I think about it, because I'm like trying to explain it myself, like I don't really know how you would describe it, like in terms of plot, because it is about this bookstore, but I feel like it's more about this woman Tuki and her husband and the bookshop she works at. So it like mostly surrounds all these characters and like their lives and this like period of time around like early 2020-ish. And then this haunting of the bookshop by this woman who died, whose name is Flora. So like that is a part of it, and I really like that part. Like I thought it was really interesting, but it's just like, it's like way more than that. It's like that feels like a much smaller subplot. Yes, that's The Sentence. Overall, I enjoyed this one. So the next two are, this is gonna be a little bit of a spoiler for another video, but I read these two books as inspiration from On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. These are recommendations that were based off of that. So I'll talk about The House on Mango Street first. That was like super short, by Sandra Cisneros, and this is like really easy to read. It almost reads a little middle grade, although there are some themes in it that are a little bit older. But it's essentially these like little vignettes of this girl Esperanza and her life growing up on Mango Street in this like Hispanic quarter, and like all the challenges that are faced there, and her growing up as a kid in this community. And I did think it was really beautiful. The writing was very poetic, like Ocean Vuong's writing, and very lyrical, and there's a lot of really interesting themes and challenges like that are brought up in this book. So overall, really enjoyed this. Also, I would say I didn't quite love it as much as On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, but I thought it was really good. I feel like it would have hit me a little bit harder if I had been a little bit younger and read this, because I feel like, I don't know if this is true, but it feels like it was written for a slightly younger audience. So that is The House on Mango Street. And then I read A Little Life. It has been on my TBR for a really long time. This book is about this group of friends, Jude, Willem, Malcolm, and JB, and their lives from when they meet in college throughout the rest of their lives, essentially. And it goes back, even like flashes back to when they were kids and like the challenges and struggles that they faced growing up. And this book is extremely dark and sad, and I've never cried so much when I read a book. I mean, truly, I think I cried towards the beginning too for like about 100 pages. So it's like really heartbreaking, and a lot of that has to do with Jude's backstory. It is just truly like heartbreaking. So like, please read the trigger warnings and know that like, it's like one of these books, like this was 5 stars for me. It was amazing. I loved it. I've never felt so like, I don't know, just like my heart wanted to explode. And Willem, one of my favorite characters, like all-time favorite book characters now for sure. But it's hard to recommend. While like I loved this book so much, it is so dark and really sad that it's like really tough to recommend. Like I feel like you kind of have to be in a good place, and honestly, like I talk about it in my vlogs, I won't talk too much, but like this kind of sent me in like a bit of a downward spiral. It's also really chunky. It's like 700 pages of that, like that kind of emotion that's like really dark, and I feel like that's kind of partly what adds to that, like just the experience of it being dark and like being able to send you kind of into a depression spiral, because there's 700 pages of it and it did that to me. So yeah, A Little Life, but it is very well written, and like I get what the hype was about. It's really good, and it'll probably be like on my favorites list for a long time. Just like be aware that there's some really like dark and hard things in this book, but it's also like this like beautiful book about friendship. Yes, it's really dark. I will probably never reread it, and honestly I probably won't read anything else by this author. Like this was like enough for me. Highly enjoyed it. Just also was like crying the whole time and completely heartbroken. So, A Little Life. Okay, so yeah, I feel like I had this like period of time at the beginning of the month, or towards the beginning, that was just like reading a lot of really dark and sad books. So we moved on to Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, which won the Pulitzer this year, along with Tress by Hernan Diaz, which I'm hoping to get to later in the year, but read Demon Copperhead, which, I don't know, it like similarly has some really like dark and sad things in it. It's about this boy growing up in, I believe it's Virginia, but it's in like Appalachia area, and it is loosely inspired by David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. And this boy grows up super poor in Virginia, and basically this is like his life story about growing up, the friends he had, about his mother, relationship to his mother, and his mother's boyfriend. And there's a lot of just like really sad and dark struggles that people face in this book. But this is also really good, 5-star read for me. I'm not surprised. I mean, it won the Pulitzer. It's been a really long time since I read any Barbara Kingsolver. I mean, truly, I think I was like a teenager and I read The Bean Trees. I remember liking it. It's just been a long time. And my uncle was just like raving about this book, and they gave it to me for my birthday. So I read it, really enjoyed it. It's also similarly about like family, especially like found family and friendship and like relationships, and basically this guy's like life and upbringing and the challenges he faces, and like growing up despite those challenges that he's facing. So yes, Demon Copperhead. Okay, continuing on like that sad journey, we had Crying in H Mart, which has also been on my TBR for a super long time. Really glad I finally got to this. This is nonfiction. This is the memoir of Michelle Zauner, and also really love this. I don't actually rate memoirs because they're like people's lives, and so I always feel kind of strange rating them, but it would be a 5-star for me. I really enjoyed this. This is about her life, especially her relationship with her mother, who essentially like gets this cancer diagnosis, and then it's about like her like dealing with this cancer diagnosis emotionally, and with her, and like reflecting on her relationship with her mother. It has some of the best food scenes, I will say. They like bond a lot over food, and that was like really beautiful if you like food. This book was great. The descriptions always made me hungry. It was very sad. It was very deep about this like relationship that she has with her mother. So yeah, highly recommend. Crying in H Mart, another sad book. We have next The Wife Between Us by Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen. This has also been on my TBR for so long. I don't even know when I got this book, but finally got around to it. So this is alternating points of view of Nellie and Vanessa and their relationship with this man, Richard. And essentially, like, Richard just left Vanessa for this other woman, and Nellie is about to marry Richard. So it's like a few weeks before her wedding, but Vanessa keeps trying to get in contact with her and like talk to her about her relationship, but we don't really know why. We don't really know like exactly what happened, but yeah, it's essentially about both of these women and their relationship with Richard. I'm trying not to say too much more because I don't want to spoil it, because it is like kind of a mystery in terms of like you don't really know what happened. Yeah, I will say like I was like a little bit disappointed by this. Like it gave me more, it felt a little more like Lane Moriarty or a little bit like Colleen Hoover. Kind of It Ends With Us. It like gives me those kinds of vibes. Yeah, so I was like a little disappointed. I thought it was gonna be like much more like thriller, mystery vibes. And while like it has that, so like I'm trying not to like give any of that away, it's not as much as I thought it was gonna be, if that makes sense. I would say if you like Lane Moriarty or like Colleen Hoover, this would definitely be it. But if you're looking for like a very strict like thriller mystery, like this has it, but like not as strong of vibes as I was hoping for. So yeah, The Wife Between Us. And I know that's like a really popular one, I think, or it was really popular a few years ago. So like I enjoyed it, but it was like a little bit of a letdown. Next we have Fourth Wing. I actually read this one more towards the beginning of the month. I actually think I took a break. I was reading all those sad books and ended up taking a break and reading Fourth Wing. Really glad I did, because it is a great escapism book. And I was like super unsure. This is so popular, and I've been really hit or miss on books that are really hyped up. I found, especially with contemporary romance, it tends to like let me down a lot, and I need to like curb my expectations so I don't like hate books just because of my expectation. Fourth Wing, on the other hand, for me personally, really lived up to the hype. I think when it's fantasy, like I can get on board way more with certain tropes and stuff. Like I can just like kind of like excuse more. I don't really know. I'm not gonna go into that too much right now, but it did make me think a lot about like why and how books get hyped. Because to be fair, like I love this, and to me it lived up to the hype, but like I get why people were also disappointed, because I don't know, like I don't really understand truly what makes like a hyped book or a book like so popular to the point where like it actually sells out, like even on Amazon. I'm trying to like think about it because I think it's like really interesting, especially with social media, books getting like so hyped. This is like all over the place. Okay, sorry. I feel like I'm just like going on a tangent about my opinion of hyped books. But Fourth Wing is about Violet, and Violet's mother is like the general of this like area's like military where they live. And so she kind of like forces Violet to go into the writer's quadrant. So basically there are 4 quadrants at this college, Basquiat College, I guess. And there are the healers, the scribes, the writers, and the infantry. And Violet has trained her whole life to be a scribe, and she really wants to be a scribe. She's like good at it. She's been trying, or she like thought that that's what she would do. Her dad was one. Her dad has since passed on, but her dad was a scribe. She thought she'd be a scribe, and then one day her like mother comes and is like, nope, sorry, you have to go to the writer's quadrant. And the writer's quadrant is like the one group that you have to volunteer for, and it's like really hard to get through the training. Like a ton of people die. So really scary. A lot of people train like their whole lives for it and still die in the process. And that's like kind of one of my slight problems with the book, but anyway. So Violet's really unprepared for this, and her sister Mira has graduated a few years ago. She was a writer, she like comes and is like trying to fight the fight towards their mother and like make sure she doesn't have to be a rider, but of course, nope. There is no winning, so her sister takes her to the riders quadrant on conscription day, which is when like the new like cohort class like arrives. And the very first test is to cross this like parapet, which is like this like long, thin like bridge that's like really high up, and people fall off and die. So yeah, just to give you an idea of what this quadrant is like. And there's a couple characters. There is her best friend, Dane. They grew up together because their parents were in the military together. And he is like a second year, so Violet knows that he's gonna be in there, and her sister's like, fine, Dane, like he'll help protect you, whatever. And so there's the best friend. And then there is Xaden, who is one of the kids of the rebels. And all the kids of like these rebels were essentially marked as rebel children, and their like punishment is to be in the riders quadrant. They all have to be, even though normally you like volunteer to be a rider. So they are all there, and Xaden is one of them. He's like super powerful though, and has like the most powerful dragon of them all. And his dad was the one who like led the rebellion. So there's that. There's very much like a bit of an enemies vibe going on there. So he's like there the day of, or on conscription day, and he and Violet meet like right before she goes across the parapet. So yeah, okay, I don't want to say too much more because this book is so great. I loved it. If you're like an ACOTAR fan, I feel like you'll definitely like this. Like to me, it was in those same like veins. It just like draws you in. The relationship was super well done, like the tension between characters. I liked the world. I thought it was really interesting. However, a lot of things are definitely not explained yet, but I'm usually pretty forgiving in a first book in a series because it's like, especially a fantasy series, like it's not necessarily like meant to all be known in the beginning. So like I usually give a lot of leeway, and that's kind of what I did here. The one problem I have with this book is like so many people die, and like it just really doesn't make sense given the world, and that there's like so many people dying already once they become riders. And like there are so few dragons, so like I get that, but I don't think they have to like die. Like just it felt too much to me. It just like didn't even make sense to me for the world, like why they would be doing this to their own children, I guess. I don't know, maybe it'll be explained more later, but that was like my one problem. There are still other like holes to me in the world and stuff, but again, I'm hopeful that all will be explained. I really loved it and was very pleasantly surprised. I think like it got so hyped, so I was like thinking that I wouldn't like it. I'm not sure why, because I guess I've been reading other books lately that were really hyped, and I just like had not had a good time. Again, more contemporary romance. So I like actually had a not as high of expectation and ended up really liking this. It became like the new ACOTAR in my friend group. Like all my friends are all now reading it and loving it, and it's just so fun to talk about. Love it. All the theories and all the characters and stuff like that. The dragons, oh my gosh, yes. Like I partly was also didn't think I'd like this book because like I'm not like the biggest dragon person, but like I am sold after this. Like absolutely loved it. So good. Like I immediately, I wasn't even finished, and I pre-ordered the next one because I'm so excited, and I will probably do a reading vlog of that because, oh, just so good. So yes, I'll stop talking about it now. I know you've probably heard it from literally everybody ever, but for me, I had an absolutely fantastic time reading it. Thought it was really good. We next have Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This is my first Brandon Sanderson ever, and I loved this. It was so great. This is about Tress, and she has grown up on this island. She is friends with the Duke's son, and yeah, essentially like no one can leave this island, or they're not supposed to, but Tress and the Duke's son definitely have a thing, and it's very cute, but the Duke does not approve of that at all, and like thinks his son needs to like marry another royal, whatever, typical. So the Duke takes his son to go marry someone else, like meet all the other like women in the other lands, and they leave the island, which is really shocking to everybody, but they leave. He's the Duke, he can kind of do what he wants. And then after years or months a long, long time, essentially, the Duke comes back, but his son doesn't come back. And Tress thinks that the story the Duke tells is like really strange and doesn't really understand, but also thinks like she should go save him. So she goes off on this adventure to save the Duke's son, Charlie. And she like meets a lot of people on the way and has like so much like growth. It's just like very much a story of like growth and like coming into oneself. And I just like really love this. I love the world. It's like set in this world where like the oceans are like these spore oceans, which you can't really like touch, and they like have certain properties that like make them kind of reactive. And so she's like sailing these seas and dealing with these like spore oceans. I loved it. I thought it was like so good, and I'm very excited. Like this got me onto like the Brandon Sanderson train. I ordered Mistborn, so I'm very excited to read that. But just like so cute. I really love the coming of age thing and just like her adventures. I thought it was so good. So yeah, Tress of the Emerald Sea. Next we have Shuna's Journey by Hayao Miyazaki, and this is a graphic novel manga that Miyazaki did a long time ago. I want to say in the 80s. I ended up finding this secondhand online at Powell's and was really intrigued because I'm a huge Studio Ghibli fan. So yeah, this is about this prince, Shuna, and this man shows up in Shuna's kingdom with these like seeds, these like kind of magical or like unknown seeds. So like Shuna goes on this journey to find these seeds where they are because they could like really feed his entire kingdom. So he goes on this journey, comes in contact with a lot of different challenges, meets this girl Thea. Yeah, I thought this was great. I will say it's a lot darker than I expected. Like there's some things that happen and some themes and stuff that are a lot darker than I expected. But overall, really loved this. Highly enjoyed the art. Yes, would highly recommend. Okay, next I have some like fall reads. And first, I actually read this one at the very beginning of the month. The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, and I listened to this. This is about Mika, who is a witch, and she also like posts videos, witchy videos online, but is kind of doing it under the expectation that it's like fake. But she's actually really a witch, practices magic, and in this society, they basically, witches can't really like be together or like live together because it like creates too much power and there's like too much risk, I guess. And she ends up getting this like inquiry from this place or this man that's like caring for these 3 children who are witches, and like kind of begs her to come and help teach them. And Mika's like really kind of sus of it. She's like, what's going on? Because like the normal people aren't really supposed to know about witches and that they're like real. And so she's like, what? But it turns out it's like a legit inquiry, and she goes to this house to help teach these children witchcraft. And in doing so, she meets a lot of other great characters. And I thought this was super wholesome, very fall witchcraft. Yeah, I really loved it. There's very cute romance in it, and her relationship and her teaching these children is very like cute and wholesome. And yeah, I enjoy this one. Definitely would recommend for like fall witch vibes. Next, we had Accidentally Amy, which is a contemporary romance that takes place in the fall. And yeah, honestly, this one was like not super memorable for me. I was thinking about it, I was like, I cannot even remember the name of the main character, because the book is called Accidentally Amy because the very first scene is like this woman, Izzy in a coffee shop, and she is like a really long line and she's late for her first day of work, so she ends up taking someone else's drink order that's like the same as hers, and she already paid, so she's like, oh, it's fine. So she takes this drink, and then she runs into this guy, like literally runs into him, spills coffee all over him. It's this like very cute, like meet cute moment. But turns out she like goes to her first day of work, and turns out this guy is like her boss or boss's boss or something, and is like really weirded out because he like thinks her name is Amy and is like I don't know, has some trauma with lying and stuff. So he's like kind of weirded out by it. Anyway, so that's like the whole beginning of it, but I didn't even remember her actual name because the book is called Accidentally Amy, which is funny. But they had like such chemistry and vibes that they end up talking more. I don't know. I really, like, not super memorable. I will say, like, the plus of this, like, I do remember there are some really cute moments and interactions, but I will say I think part of the issue I had is just like it's like really cringy. Her like inner narration is just like really cringy, and what she like says and thinks about him. Oh, also there was like the Greek god trope in describing this man. Oh my gosh, I'm just so done with that. Like the huge man, tiny woman, like I don't know, it's overdone. Yes, and then there were like a few moments that were really cute to do with fall and like fall descriptions, but I would have hoped for more, so that's a little sad. And overall, I just think it was too cringy for me. It was like kind of hard for me to read and like take seriously. So yeah, I don't know. I like cute, like fun read. Like I read it pretty quickly, but too cringy for me. So yeah. I'm really trying to like get off of my like, or think about how I am being critical of contemporary romance. And then the other like kind of fall vibes book, or no, very fall vibes, is My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levin, which just came out at the end of August, and I read it right when it came out. And this is about, I'm like so bad with names. I don't know how I cannot seem to remember anyone's name. Cassie, right. Cassie and Frederick J. Fitzwilliam, which is a really funny name. But Cassie needs a place to live, and she sees this ad that's like $200 for a room, like in Chicago, also very sus, which she talks about a lot because that is really sus. But it ends up being this guy, Frederick J. Fitzwilliam, and he has some really sus things going on. It's kind of already in the title, but essentially he's a vampire. So like she finds out in this like really kind of jarring way, and of course is like really freaked out and has to be convinced to come back. Yeah, I would say this is like really fun to read if you like, especially if you like contemporary romance. This just has like the small twist and he's the vampire, but there are some like, there's some stuff with that at the end. The other thing that I think that I had a little bit more of a hard time reading this is because the way that Cassie talks, it just is like, she felt like super judgmental towards anybody else, especially other women. Like the way the narration talked about other people, it felt like she was super judgmental, but then she's also really used to being like highly criticized for like her type of art and a lot of things about her, and it just was like kind of weird and contradictory, and it kind of did not make me love the main character as much, because it felt like she was just like kind of on her high horse about her work and like being so great at it, but having the struggle of like being in her 30s and like having to work all these jobs like at a coffee shop and other places because she was like an artist trying to, I don't know, like some things just like didn't completely add up for me, especially in like how she would talk about other people and be like pretty hypercritical. Yeah, so that was that. I feel like it sounds like not great, but it was overall fun. Like I had a good time reading it. Glad I read it. I don't know. It felt like again towards like maybe too contemporary. So I ended up, I don't know, having some gripes with the character and pacing of it. I was looking on Goodreads and there was a description of it that described it as fanfic, and I thought that was really accurate because I feel like the writing in this felt a little like fanficky, which is not like, I don't have a problem with that, but I do feel like that's almost like how this main character was written. Okay, I have to go, so I have to be really quick, but the last book, I hope I'm not forgetting anything. Okay, I'm editing, and of course I did forget 2 books, so yeah. The Last Graduate and then the Golden Enclaves. I realized I've like been starting a lot of series this year and not finishing them, and I started this one many years ago, I think like when the first one came out, and I had this one pre-ordered but never got to it for some reason, and so decided to read it, and I really loved the second one. So the Skullman's series, A Deadly Education is the first one. I really love that book. It's about this like magical, like school for magical children, and essentially in this world it's like not safe for magical children to like just grow up at home. It's like safer to send them to this school, even though the school is really dangerous and a lot of people die. There are these creatures that kill magical children, and so it's safer to send them there. And so Elle is a student at the school, Skullman's, and she is like trying to get through school and not die and also like find a place for herself, because she's kind of an outcast. She's not part of like an enclave, which are like these groups of people in cities. So like there's like the New York enclave, the London enclave, Shanghai. There's these enclaves across the world that like also keep people safe. Yeah, anyway, so that's kind of like the premise of the series. I read the second and third, so I won't say too much about them. I really love the second one. I will say though, and I don't know how much to say because I don't want to like spoil anything, I was really disappointed by the ending, by the third one. Yeah, I don't want to say why because I don't want to spoil anything, but so here's like mini spoiler if you don't want to know anything. I'm gonna try to be really vague though. Essentially, there's like this relationship that crops up between two characters in the third one that to me kind of like ruined a lot of the other, like the impact, I guess, of something else going on and other relationships. I'm like trying to be really vague and not spoil anything, but yeah, I don't know. It just like kind of really ruined it for me, and I was really sad about that. I still think like it's worth reading. Like I really loved the first two. Just the third one took some turns that like, I don't know. I feel like if those were the turns it was gonna take, it like should have maybe been longer. Just like, yeah, it felt a little bit rushed, but yeah. So 2 more. Okay. I did a reread of The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. I read this back in like 2019 or 2020, can't remember, but really loved this. One of my favorite dystopian novels of all time. Definitely like canon in that genre, in my opinion. And it's essentially, it's like, it actually takes place, this was the funny thing about reading it in 2023, is that I think it starts out in like 2024, which is like really not that far away. So that was really funny to read, is like we're at that point. And I think that she wrote this in like the 90s. But it's like not that far off, because it's about like global climate change, like climate crisis, extreme heat. There's a lot of that in this, and wildfires and stuff like that, and a lot of that is like not that far off from what we were seeing. And I think that's what I enjoyed most the first time I read this book, is it felt like the most realistic in terms of like what the future looks like. But, and I really enjoyed the main character, Lauren, and hearing about Earthseed and her whole philosophy. So she's one of my favorites. Anyway, second time around, I did like take some notes and stuff and just had a great time reading it. The reason I reread this, I don't often do rereads, but I want to read the second one. I don't know why I didn't, but I ended up getting The Parable of the Talents, which is the second one. And I felt like I had to reread the first. It's just been too long. I didn't remember much and really needed to do a reread. Really glad I did, because it is a favorite and it was fun to remember. And then I kind of read the back of this and I realized like I might not necessarily have needed to reread, because I think this takes place even further in the future. So anyway, like I don't need to have like the exact plot in my head of this previous one, but probably was good. So hoping to read this one in this coming month, September or October. So yeah. And that is everything that I read in the month of August. Such a good reading month. Yeah, I know this video is super long, but thank you so much for watching, and I hope you are having a great day, and we'll see you next time.